I'm DJ.
And I'm Andrew.
Welcome to the One Shots Tavern Podcast.
TTRPG podcast, where we seek out new ways to tell your stories through different systems and games. Today, we are talking about something near and dear to our heart. That is the Cipher System by Monty Cook Games.
Andrew got me into Cypher going on almost a year ago now, if not more, and kind of pulled us into a campaign, which was great. And it's been kind of like crazy how different but similar it can be to 5e.
The problem that I saw happening over and over outside of just my own games was, and I'm not here to rag on what people enjoy, right? Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but it was like, Cyberpunk 5e, or it was,
Yep.
like Star Wars 5e. And it was
Yep.
here's the thing. Those supplements are often still great. What they
Yeah.
do well is they are an on-ramp for somebody to explore other things with familiar rules. My argument that I would say, and I think a lot of people share with me, is there are better systems to do different genres, to do different
Mhm.
uh, IPs. There are so many other tools in other systems, and that's a big reason why we're doing this podcast. I literally had a dream, and it was a weird dream, and it was like this
All the
awful
best settings
scene
are.
of like a colony ship entering into a new system and being ravaged by some bizarre dark matter virusy thing. And I just started writing. Like, I woke up and I was like, I need to write right now. It was one of those moments, right? And this happened literally a decade ago. And I wrote it, and at the time I was playing Pathfinder, and
Mhm.
I made a whole supplement. Is awful. It will never see the light of day. It was so bad. But I did what I'm describing, right? I tried to
Yeah.
make a 3.5 for my system because I wasn't educated enough on other systems.
Right.
So that story sat with me for years, and I was done with we had ran, probably our third 5e game and multi-year like campaign.
Right.
And I was just bored with running fantasy, honestly, and I'm like, I want to play something else. Before Cypher, I had only really played around. I'd done like one game of Savage Worlds, Star Wars. I'd
Mhm.
played a couple games of Fate, which is an interesting system that I'm sure we might talk about again one day.
Oh,
I
definitely.
played a little bit of that, but I just craved a system of rules that would support the narrative I wanted to tell, and
Yeah,
it
and
wasn't
that's the
5e.
big thing. Yeah, 5e is very much a fantasy system, and there's not much you can do to kind of change it out.
Yeah.
And so we stumbled upon Cipher System. A little background about Monty Cook Games, the company that produces Cipher and Numenera and all of the other settings for Cipher System. Is Monty Cook worked for Wizards of the Coast from 1992 to about 2002. And so like Monty Cook was not like solely responsible,
No,
but
but
directly responsible for a lot of modules, including
mm,
working on Planescape. Quit in 2002 and then came back for D&D Next, which of course became 5e. So yeah, you've probably touched something that he's worked on in the past. And so after he left the D&D Next project for reasons that he only describes as he really liked the people that he worked with, uh, not so much the people he worked for.
yeah.
Um, he decided to go out and start Monty Cook Games and released a bunch of stuff, Tolus, Numenera, and from Numenera came the Cipher System.
Right. So Numenera was the first thing I heard about, and it's freaking weird. And that's what got me excited in the first place. I
Yeah,
actually ran Numenera. I don't know, were you in that game
I was
along?
not.
I ran, the starter set. There's
Oh,
an
okay.
adventure in the starter set. I ran it a couple of years back. I really wanted to just mess around with it. I watched some videos. There was, an old, like, Geek and Sundry playthrough of some
Oh, okay.
Numenera stuff, and I was like, "This is really weird and cool, and I wanna try it out." Um, but then I picked up these 2 gorgeous books,
Yeah.
which I mostly own because they're pretty. I haven't actually ran a Numenera campaign. I've used these in my Cypher game,
Yeah. Oh, for
but
sure.
the reason is Numenera, and I'm seeing this as a common thread, and I'm trying to implement it in my own game design. But Numenera came first. They made a rule set that helped them deliver the storytelling that they wanted to for Numenera.
Right.
Amongst those mechanics, there is something called a cipher, which we'll talk about in a second. And that cipher was kind of core to their storytelling. As a result, when they made a setting agnostic rule set that was, like very one to one with Numenera for how it works,
Mhm.
um, they made and named it Cipher. Because they adopted this idea of a cipher, which is basically just a magical item. Um,
Right.
it's just a one-time use magical item.
Like a
Um,
grenade.
it's a grenade. They're all grenades, basically.
Some kinda grenade. A motion
Exactly.
sensing grenade,
Yeah.
uh,
But I mean, it's
remove
that
you from reality
principle,
grenade.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so basically a cipher. Let's talk briefly about Numenera and how it kind of informs some of the design. So Numenera is called the set inside the setting. It is called the Ninth World, a civilization, starting with us as this present day, like America, is the first world. So
Yeah.
civilization has risen to its height and collapsed catastrophically and almost to nothing 9 times.
Right.
Amongst these 9 histories, we don't actually have in the lore, like, answers for what all 9 were explicitly. It's lost
Right.
history. It's the idea of, like, in Dungeons and Dragons, like, how there was the old, like, Netherese Empire, and, like, how that's where a lot of the dungeons and ruins come from. The idea is in the Ninth World, there is so much weird technology and essentially magic, even though they don't generally call it that, and they lump it all under one umbrella term, which is the Numenera, which is basically weird shit from another
Yeah.
civilization. And the idea is all these weird artifacty kind of junk that has floated around. One of these civilizations maybe was all nanites. Another one was non-human. Another one was whatever. All these different civilizations developed a weird technology. And imagine if somebody found a calculator in some future iteration of
Right.
civilization. They'd be like, "What is this weird thing?" They might just throw it away. But in Numenera, it's basically you've got weird stuff and it does something cool. And
Yeah.
it's
Yep.
maybe unstable, it's maybe old, and it's not gonna do it again. You basically get to use it once.
Right. It's its last bit of life.
As a game master, I've given out a lot of magic items. And I've sat there and been so annoyed when the players don't use something I gave them like 3 or 4 sessions ago, because either 1, they
Yeah.
forgot about it, or 2, they think they need to save it for something important that's coming, when the reality is they really should use the tools they have at their fingertips.
Yeah, exactly. And the next one might be even better.
Yes.
For sure.
So
And yeah,
no, no,
it's
no,
a
go ahead.
great mechanic. And it makes players excited for like, hey, I just used up all my ciphers. We just finished a boss battle.
Yep,
Is there anything cool nearby? Well, let's find out.
yep,
Right. And you find out, and like there's some really out there off the wall ones,
yeah,
but they have several different tables that are for different settings, right? Magic items that are for different types of games, whether it's a fantasy, high fantasy, low fantasy, cyberpunk, space
yeah,
odyssey, whatever you want to run, Cypher has it. Literally, because
yep,
they have a growing library now of different things. One of the first ones they released, I believe, was The Strange.
Mhm.
And The Strange is basically about these people who can pop in and out of worlds. That's their whole deal, which is great because then they expanded on that with probably one of the coolest box sets of all time. And it is called Invisible Sun, the Black Cube.
I want it
You
so bad.
It is so beautiful. It comes with props, it comes with cards, handouts, anything, like, just so much stuff for $200
Yeah.
for one, which is crazy. And, like, it takes what The Strange had of people hopping from plane to plane in different worlds and goes, "Okay, there's a secret society of people who travel between worlds." But on top of that, they have Claim the Sky, which is their superhero
Oh, yeah.
module. And so like it's like, hey, let's run a superhero game. They have
Yeah.
first responders, which is like a real world, you're a paramedic, police officer, or a firefighter. They have Stay Alive, which is their zombie apocalypse survival. Of course, Numenera, Path of the Plane Breakers, because of course, like I mentioned, Monty Cook worked on the original Planescape.
Which is, by the
Uh,
way, my absolute favorite all-time
right,
5e setting.
exactly.
Like,
And Plane Breakers takes all of that coolness and puts it into the Cipher system. It's even 5e compatible.
yep.
A lot of this stuff is. And then they have a new one coming out. I believe it's called Rust and Redemption.
Oh,
Don't
really?
quote me on that. This is one of the ones from their recent Kickstarter. And it is a post-apocalypse. Instead
It's
of
so
being the
great.
apocalypse, it's just post-apocalypse. They give you the
Pokey apocalypse.
tools. Pokey-apocalypse. Oh, and Old Gods of
Oh,
Appalachia.
yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
can't
Yeah.
forget about that one. that's on my bookshelf.
Yep.
But like so many different things. So you have, that Call of Cthulhu-esque horror,
Right.
right? And you have zombie horror and you have, the world and you have everything. And they're basically saying, hey, our system can be used for just about any setting you can imagine.
So,
And I love that.
throwback to the problem that I was talking about, right? So, like, I was like, "I wanna run this." I tried it with 3.5, it was messy, but even then, I was trying to push out of the box, try new mechanics. I basically was like, "Alright, I'm gonna use Cypher. This is a setting agnostic system,
Yeah,
so I can build my own setting, and not only do I have the ability to do that, but I also can reference if I'm doing some genre stuff, I can reference Numenera, which honestly, there's a lot of Numenera stuff in my setting because I do
right,
weird technology stuff. Um, not just like normal cyberpunk, but like kind of surrealist, kind of body horror, kind of like annihilation, some like weird stuff going on in my setting. And I'm able to adopt some of the mechanics, some of the things present in Numenera, but at the end of the day, I can just homebrew it. That's
right.
one of my favorite things about Cypher
Yeah.
is homebrew isn't a chore. So before I get ahead of myself, let's talk about how this system works
Yeah,
and
right.
why
We're raving about it, but we
I
haven't
would
talked about
ever
any
run
of
it.
it.
Yeah. Okay. Simplest thing we can talk about. You have 3 stats, and they're not really stats in the way you think of them in 5e or other systems. They are pools of resources.
Yep.
Those resources are spent through the course of your day and over throughout play
Yep.
and then represent you spending yourself in a lot of ways.
Right.
They are
You're
also your health
overextending.
pools
Yep.
because you take damage to the very resource that you are using to overcome obstacles.
Right.
Um, Classic example is your might pool. You have might, speed, and intellect. Might,
Yep.
you're going to go out, you're going to bonk stuff with a hammer, and you're going to roll a defensive might roll against an attack that might hit you. And that represents like my strength is dwindling, not only because I've exerted myself, but I've also taken that damage. Um,
Right.
and that's like deeply uh like how the system works. It is about the player having control of the narrative, but also having control
Fully.
of how they spend themselves in so many different ways.
That player control kind of extends to almost the entire game, right? Because the game master does not roll anything.
Which
The
man,
game
I
master
do miss
decides
rolling.
nothing.
I do miss rolling, but it's so freeing not
Right,
having to roll. Because, like I said, there's a might defense roll. There's also a speed defense roll. There is an
right,
intellect defense roll. Basically, if my creature is attacking the player mentally, they roll a defense roll. It's a
right,
classic problem. Think back to maybe when you were trying 5e or you're around somebody else with 5e. I'm pretty sure everybody's witnessed it. The GM says, I'm going to attack your character now with my goblin or whatever. They attack, they roll to hit, and the player's like, what? I don't get to defend? It's like,
right,
well, your AC already calculates your dex whatever.
right.
Basically, the
Which is
player goes, I don't
boring.
have agency over this
Yeah,
hit. I want to be an active
yeah,
participant in this part of combat. This
exactly.
system does that.
So, like, you have agency, right? Whether or not you succeed or fail on your defense roll, really, most of the time is going to be up to you and how much you're willing to spend to protect yourself, right? Because that's the thing. You're countering, you're going into a defense. So, like, of course, you are spending yourself, your
Yeah.
might and speed, you could almost see as like how tired you're getting, right? Instead of it just necessarily being like, oh, well, yeah, think about it. If they hit you, that's damage. But if you instead like use extra resources to avoid getting hit, that's like you getting tired down.
I was first
Yeah,
introducing one of our friends, Will. He's in the Cypher campaign that I've been running for about a year. When I was introducing him to it, he was like, "Oh my gosh, this solves the problem that I've had with playing a caster in 5e." He wanted the ability in 5e to overexert himself, right? I'm out of
yeah,
spell slots. He played a warlock. He really felt the pain of not
yeah.
having enough spell slots. He
Sorry, they're getting
wanted the
three now.
moment, like, yeah, right. They're changing stuff because this is a problem. But
Exactly.
he wanted that anime moment of like, oh, like Kaioken, right? Like where you just
Yeah,
like
yep,
you you really push yourself beyond and maybe at the
right,
cost of your own self. Or like
yep.
you could kill yourself because you did such a strong attack. You
I
actually
almost
could do
did.
that in Cypher.
Yeah. Yep, it's super great, and, that kinda, like it feels so satisfying. It really does. There's some other things that I really love about Cypher as well. For example, the character creation, I think, is one of the more in-depth character creations that I've come across, and it's so simple. It is a sentence. You are a blank,
Adjective. Yeah, so it's
blank,
adjective,
noun,
noun, who, verbs, basically is
does a
how
thing.
it
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
So for example, I played a Craven explorer who fights dirty. And what did that mean?
So
Your descriptor is like it provides a boon, usually a boon and a bane, right? It gives you some skills, and it's a way to describe your character's personality in a way. So my character was Craven, so he was a coward. He was fast. He could easily run away from things, but he had some downsides. He couldn't take on dangerous things by himself. Um, and he would not willingly go into danger,
yeah.
right, without people kind of pushing.
So basically
So
what
yeah,
you've got is it's not a traditional class system. Like I am a warlock, my subclass is celestial warlock. It kind of does that just a little bit, but everything is isolated from one another. So it's not
right,
I pick this, then I pick this. It's I would like to be typically you pick your type first, which is the closest thing to a class. So
yep,
your core ones in Cypher, you have explorer, you have warrior, you have adept, which is your magic kind of individual, and speaker, which is your
yeah,
charismatic kind of individual.
right,
That could be bardic, or it could just be social, right? That's the
yeah,
other cool thing because this system is not assuming there's magic in your game.
right.
It's putting things kind of in a generic sense, but it,
Could
it
be
doesn't shy
science.
away from the fact that you're doing
Yeah,
fantastical things.
you are not locked into the archetype of being a paladin, of a monk, of anything like that,
Yep.
because you choose your type. So, say you chose an adept or a speaker, right? They're not very like weapon geared classes, right? But with your focus, you can take on that extra aspect. So you can be a caster, a full-on caster, and you could take something like license to carry. It basically gives you all of the firearm skills, right? And makes you really good at it. Or another one of my favorites is wields two weapons, which is one of the only ways, one of the few ways, not one of the only ways, that you can attack twice in a round. Or you could just take master's weapons. And so like you imagine your wizard is able to use any weapon that the fighter is able to use, right?
Your wizard is
Effectively.
a battle master.
Yes, like an
Your
actual
wizard's a
battle
battle
master.
master.
Not one that's
Yeah.
like half butted battle master.
Like
I
poorly multi-classed and like falling
yeah,
apart.
because like I don't know. It's super great, and there are so many focuses. And the more books you
It's
buy,
crazy.
the more focuses there are. I'm currently putting together an actual play of Cypher, and I was like, okay, this is a space campaign, and it's kind of like what Andrew is talking about, where he uses Numenera stuff in his world. Well, in my world's a lot more magical than his is, but it's going to also be in space, and so it's like cool. Whereas his is like Star Wars with a little less, right? Mine's like Star Wars with a little more as far as the magic goes. But I can take the Numenera stuff, I could take the Plane Breaker stuff, I can take all of it, present these books to my players because I have a problem and I keep buying them, and basically go, hey, go wild, have fun. Like, I
Yep.
want you to build the character that you want to play, not the one that you are stuck within confines to play. And if you need me to, I will build you a type specifically for
Right.
them.
So all the type and the focus and all that stuff, honestly, all they do is give you a guideline to follow if you're trying to kind of fall in line with that trope and that idea. The rules are so flexible that you can debatably throw all of that out and homebrew all of it. It's not even homebrew, it's how the system works. It's
Yeah.
very ability focused. So I want the ability to do a mental attack. Well, there's an ability that typically you get as an adept called onslaught. You can
Yep.
do a mental attack or a mentally manifested attack, and it even lets you
Yeah.
choose within that attack how to do it. That ability sits in isolation in the book in the abilities section. If you
And you
go
can
to your
choose any.
DM and you're like, I would like to do this, they'll be like, okay, cool. There's rules for that.
Yeah.
And boom, there you go.
Yeah.
I think that what this system does well, because again, DJ to a fault could talk about the system all day because we've had a lot of time with it, unlike some of the
Yeah.
other games we're learning. Um, this game, and we've already mentioned this a little bit, this game puts so much control in the player's hands of the narrative.
Yes.
I would say the main ways it does that is one, character creation is deeply flexible. Two, you have intrusions, which we'll explain in a little bit in a second.
We haven't even talked
But
about
you
game
have
master intrusions yet.
player and game master intrusions, which at the core, I'll just do the short explanation because we've explained it in another episode too. Um, it's just an opportunity to say, I want to do something where I'm in control of the narrative. It's either the player saying that or the GM saying
Right.
that. And it's just like all of a sudden you're a GM and your player has a player intrusion. There's one that I think best encapsulates player intrusions. Is it a speaker one? No, I don't even know. Maybe it's warrior, but it's
It's
called
warrior
I
that
know a
brings in the
guy.
friend. Yeah.
It's called
Yep,
I know a
warrior.
guy. And all
Yep.
it is the player goes, they pay a resource, which is an XP token. They pay that to the GM and they say, I know a guy. And in the middle of a fight, like we had a guy, unloading his gun. He's like, I need to call in backup. He goes, I need your backup. He calls somebody in that's nearby, zooms in on
Yep.
their ship, and they just lay down some covering fire for the party to
Right.
get an edge in the middle of the combat. And it was an NPC that I wasn't not expecting to be in the session. It was the player being able to have a cool moment
Yeah.
based on their backstory, based on who they are, the relationships they've had, the things they've invested in, and they just got
Yep.
to control the narrative for a moment.
Yeah.
Um, and then additionally, you have like the way that rolling works. So without fully doing a how to, you're going to roll a d20 for any kind of skill check, a skill check or an attack. They are identical.
Yep.
So the GM's like, this is a speed test. And that test is maybe an attack roll, kind of like you would make like with a ranged weapon. It's a speed
Yep.
test because you're shooting a gun. Or it might be, there's a bunch of rocks falling and you need to jump out of the way, right? Either way, it's a speed test. It's just a flat d20 roll. The
Yep.
GM tells you the DC in advance. Again, putting the reins in the player's hand to determine how they're going to deal with this because they know what they have to beat. They tell them the DC, and the player decides how hard they want to try to beat the DC by using points from that pool.
Yeah.
And then, and so much so, they could use enough, it's called effort, to bring the DC to 0,
Yep.
which means they don't have to roll and they
Yeah.
just succeed.
And it's going to cost, right?
Yeah.
There's always going to be a cost. For example, I had a situation in one of our games where, I really wanted to I wanted the boss fight to be over. And so I used up uh a bunch of effort to make sure I hit, and then the rest of it, I just threw all of that into my damage, which increases your damage, and I did a ridiculous amount of damage. And then from there, it was like, "Cool, guys, I'm completely spent. If I take a hit."
A leaf will kill you.
Yeah, and I was like, I was basically had one stat that had anything in it.
Yeah. But what did
But
it
like
do? It
yeah,
let you decide how the rest of the encounter was going to go. You were able
right.
to calculate that it was possible that you could do it and you
Yep.
might survive.
Exactly, and that's what happened, right? The next person to get a hit on the big bad, well, it wasn't even the big bad, it was the henchman of the big bad, essentially. He was gone. It was
Yep.
over, right?
He had
And,
like
like,
5 health and then his head got cut off.
it's satisfying, right? It
Yep.
is so satisfying to go, "I gave my all in
Yeah.
this fight." Because how many times have you played a 5th edition game and half of the party members didn't even take a hit
Yeah.
in the final fight, right? So what this does is it's like, "Hey, this battle is in your hands,"
Well, and
right?
it's not free. Like,
It's
success
not
isn't
free,
free. You
right?
have to exert yourself. Your pools will not be full at the end of an encounter. Like, it
No.
just doesn't work like that unless you're
Yeah.
choosing to essentially never okay, you're if you don't add anything to the roll, you are 100% at the mercy of a dice, right? And your rolls are often potentially going to be impossible without some degree of effort.
Right.
And you're not going to walk out of any fight without you may not get hit, but you
Right.
definitely exerted yourself.
Yeah.
Um so and I think that again, like the system is really well done. It's an elegant system. It puts the reins in the player's hands as what do you want to have happen? And it kind of follows through on that in a way that a lot of systems don't. It
It does.
it's a thing that
Yeah.
GMs often kind of promise and I don't feel like are supported in a lot of games that I've played. That is
Yeah.
changing the more that I play things that aren't 5e. But like
Yeah.
it's a
Yep.
serious thing to be able to as the player feel like a serious contributor to the narrative. And I think
Yeah.
that it's not so many players are like, I never want to be a GM. First off, that's fine.
Yeah.
But you can trick them into basically being a GM in Cypher and
Oh
giving them
yeah.
such an opportunity to really influence and control the narrative, and I
Yeah.
love that.
And it's they have to think about their actions, right? They have to think about how they're going to do things. They have to come up with like with a lot of these intrusions, they have to come up with their own lore of
Yeah,
themselves. It is one of the best systems so far, right, of what
yeah,
we've tried. There is still a ton out there and I can't wait, but it's one of the best systems that I have experienced besides the Lumen system too.
yeah,
That allows players and the game master to actually collaboratively tell a story because everybody has just as much kind of like stank stake control like and blood sweat and tears
yeah.
into it.
They're invested.
It's yeah,
I think
exactly.
that, if you really were to sit down and play a one shot of Cypher, it clicks so quickly. So to the new player, it takes some unlearning, okay, I'll be
Yeah,
honest, because you pick up bad habits from, some of the big games out there, honestly, that,
100%.
not just for Cypher, but for, like, collaborative storytelling in general, there are some bad habits that we learn in other systems. Um, I think Cypher helps people unlearn that pretty quickly. It's not that hard, but you just once it clicks, right?
Yeah.
And I see my players helping each other more, deeply invested in other people's roles and stories, and they're not just waiting for their turn to be dope. Like
Right.
they know the stakes of the encounter as it goes.
And that's the freaking coolest part because one of the actions you can take in combat as a player is to essentially not take an action for yourself,
Yeah.
but to assist the next action of
Mhm.
their teammate. So if it's one of those situations where it's like, I don't think I can do much help by attacking, you
Yeah.
can instead do something that is going to make it easier for your teammate to attack them.
Yep.
It could be distracting, it could be drawing their fire. There's so many options and it's baked into the system by saying, "Hey,
Yeah.
here's you like one of the other options in the book that it describes of things that you can do in combat is what can you think of?"
So the thing about the way that the essentially helping, lowering the DC effort, all that stuff, the way that it works is basically it's in levels. And I'm not going to get into the math. I don't really feel like it's worth it, but basically every time you help, it's like giving that person advantage.
Right.
The difference is, unlike in 5th edition, it stacks. Um,
Exactly.
but
Everybody
outside
can
of
do it.
yeah, and outside of that effort and assets, essentially is what they're called, there's no addition to the dice. So there's actually no math really that the player's doing where it's like, I add 5 to my roll. Nope, you roll a d20
Yep.
and you hope it's a big number.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of like that finale scene in Guardians of the Galaxy where like they're holding on to the stone
Yeah,
and then they all kind of like grab hands and stuff and they're sharing the burden to like,
yeah,
oh, guess what? We reduced it to zero, game
yeah.
master. And it's great. It's so narratively wonderful.
You know what sucks in 5th
Huh.
edition? When you
Yeah.
add 25 and you hit.
Yeah.
And whoop-de-doo, like, and
Yep.
nothing special happens, right?
Yeah.
In this, it's like, okay, not only can we make this an absolute success, but we can now use the rest of the effort that we might throw at this and just turn it into damage
Yeah.
or like
Yeah.
some major benefit or some
Yep.
like additional thing. So yeah, again, I I absolutely adore this system. I will okay, so let's we've talked this thing up a lot. What does it not do vanilla that, like, you would maybe choose to use a different system over it?
That's a really hard question to ask.
I can answer
W
mine first.
Alright, I'll let you answer yours first.
I don't know if I would run fantasy with Cypher. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I don't think this is the go-to for just a
Yeah.
normal high fantasy game. It 1000% works. The rules
Yeah.
exist. Planebreaker is a supplement within Cypher that already is built for this. But me personally, I would probably just pick something else because there's
Yeah.
a million other interesting high fantasy
Right.
settings.
Yeah. And, especially if you are the type of person who wants to play a big caster, like, yeah, you get a bunch of special abilities. You have to go out and seek the very magical ones because
Yeah.
they're not a part of the type. Some of them are a part of your focus, but you might not want to
Yeah.
limit to that focus. And some of them are part of a flavor, which is just, something you can trade out with your focus
Yep.
every now and then. But as far as like lower magic settings or
Yeah.
modern settings or super far future settings or post, like, perfect, right? Because it feels right.
I mean, here's the thing. Part of this adventure, this podcast that we're doing, is looking at what would I do with this system. So
Yeah.
if I were to just
Well, I've
if it
changed weapons a little bit. Yeah.
right, but like,
I was
but
about to
I'm saying
praise
you as a
weapons, but
GM, you as a
yeah.
GM, yeah, weapons leave something to be desired.
Yeah.
I think if you as a GM right now are looking at Cypher, here's why I think it would be for you or not.
Yeah.
You have your own setting and you are looking for a system to support it without making something whole cloth brand new of your own, especially if it's not just high
Yeah.
fantasy. Um, if that's you, use Cypher. It will be so easy to do it.
Definitely. Yep.
Um, I would say there are systems that do specific things better. Any setting agnostic system will be not the best at any one genre,
Definitely
right?
not.
You cannot be everything to everyone, right?
Right.
Cypher cannot be the best sci-fi game and the best fantasy game. It just doesn't work like that. But what it does give you is flexibility and it gives you a framework to build on. And that's
Right.
why I love it.
And they encourage you to break and, mend the rules,
Yeah.
right? To make it what you need it to be. And that's awesome.
Yep. Well, we've ranted and raved about this system for a while. I so appreciate you all taking the time to listen and enjoy. Hopefully, by listening to this Cypher episode, you will understand the references that we make to the system
Right.
throughout the rest of the podcast because it's what
Yeah.
we're playing the most right now. That being said, if you've given it a try, if you have any recommendations of how you've made it your own, please let us know in the comments
Definitely.
below. Check out our Patreon. We'll probably be doing an actual play. Well, DJ's working on an actual play, full on campaign. We're definitely going to be doing a session with some friends that haven't gotten a chance to try Cypher. So that will be over on our Patreon. Come over there, drop some support, couple bucks a month, like really genuinely makes this worth it and makes us be able to increase
Definitely.
production and do new crazy ideas. And buy new systems so that we can try them out
Right.
for you all.
Because we want to
So
try them all.
yeah,
I
really,
know it's
we want to
impossible, but we
find
want to.
things that we love just as much and more than
Yeah.
Cypher. So thank you guys for listening in. This has been a blast, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah. Look out for part 2.
Yeah, definitely.
sure
There
it'll
will be a
happen.
part 2. We'll
Maybe
probably
not
do
now,
like
but someday.
we'll do like a Cypher retrospective when I finish up our campaign or something.
Cypher revisited.
Yeah, definitely. There is much more in a system like this. So thank you
All right.
guys and have a good one.